Let's go through the papers then this morning and today. Anthropologist Mary-Ann Hotter and the editor from Spiked, Tom Slater, are both here. Good to see you both this morning.
Hi.
Tom, can we start with the Mail on Sunday and looking at David Warburton?
Yeah, when I woke up this morning, I didn't know anything about this. What is it all about?
Well, there's a lot of layers to it. So David Warburton, as you were trailing there, has been suspended over these sex and drugs allegations. So there's images of him which have been circulated of him next to what appears to be cocaine, recordings of him seeming to kind of discuss ordering drugs, as well as 3 allegations of sexual harassment, unwanted advances, effectively 2 of which actually being people who work as commons aides. Then there's this other aspect to this, which is speculation in this report here in the Mail on Sunday, that whether or not this could be a stitch-up of some way, shape or form because of the amount of material that seems to be amassed, that general concern about foreign powers potentially trying to...
And the photograph that they're showing is a very odd one, isn't it? He's sort of just sitting there next to a table with what looks like a scotch on the rocks and then lines of... A roasting tin with lines of cocaine, or what appears to be. And why would he pose? And it's a posed shot, isn't it?
Well, that photo in particular, some of the recordings which are being quoted here, where he's kind of talking openly about how £160 for 2 grams of cocaine was a good deal. At one point, texting someone allegedly, as we should say, asking if someone's dealer will deliver to Westminster Bridge. So, if what is being alleged here turns out to be some way accurate, it seems pretty brazen in some respects, definitely.
Well, he's denying it, of course, denying any wrongdoing on that.
And he says he's got a very robust defence, but I just don't know how you explain that photograph and maybe those recordings.
And one aspect to it, which I think might be worth flagging up, is that part of the allegations here involve the British Kebab Awards as well. So there's just layer upon layer at this.
The British Kebab
Awards. Apparently, one of his unwanted advances took place at this esteemed awards event, which seems to be it's this strange point in the calendar, which seems to have a lot of crossover with Westminster politicians and journalists for some reason. Never quite.
Funny that, isn't it?
There's so many aspects of this which are more baffling than illuminating.
Yes, very odd. Well, we shall have to hear his defence. He's got a robust one.
He says he's got a robust defence, but we'll have to hear it.
We shall hear it. Yeah. To the Sunday Times, Mary-Ann, looking at what are apparent war crimes left behind in Ukraine.
Yeah, a bit of a handbrake turn from the British Kebab Awards. So this is the early reports saying that from areas that Russian troops are withdrawing from, there's evidence of war crimes. So the bodies of dead Ukrainians that have been mutilated, including the bodies of children, areas where perhaps piles of human corpses have been mined so as to target people who would be coming to kind of lay the dead to rest.
Yeah.
And of course, in your kind of news headlines, the areas that the Russian troops have been leaving, they've been planting landmines. And this fundamentally means that it would not be safe for civilians to return to those areas. And so the millions of people who are now displaced, who are desperate to go home, the way that Ukraine would perhaps start to rebuild if and when, the situation becomes resolved peacefully, it becomes land that you cannot return to safely. It's land that you just can't call home anymore.
The bodies either at the moment if they've been booby trapped.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of question is, you hear these stories from the Second World War. You hear these stories about other areas. Princess Diana was very active in working against landmines. There's repeated campaigns to prevent these devices from being built and manufactured in the first place, because why are they designed like that? They're designed to cause maximum damage and often target civilians. And that fundamentally is a war crime.
And often years later.
Well, that's it, yeah. The legacy of this, the painful, damaging, murderous legacy is decades rather than months. And, I guess the only thing about this is that we are in an era of smartphones, of satellite imagery, of people being able to record the evidence in real time in a way that perhaps hasn't been available to civilians previously. And so one thinks that at least there would be a compelling, kind of weight of evidence to prove that these things were happening, but quite whether that then translates into action within the international courts.
How can it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the thing is,
he's not going to submit himself to it, and there's no way we're going to send people in to try and arrest him.
Well, no, that's it. And the thing is, it's such a brazen, on the world stage, illegal invasion that you kind of think, in the world view, what are a few, breaking of, Geneva Conventions? It's not like this was following the rules in the first place, and these are a few aberrations.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Tom, we're going to build more nuclear power stations.
Yes, so Kwasi Kwarteng has floated the possibility that by 2050 we could have 6 or 7 new nuclear power stations. This is ahead of the energy security strategy, which is going to be published finally this week, obviously in large part in response to the question of how the world is going to power itself, obviously with Russian oil and gas and wanting to move away from that. So this was a point of contention originally between Kwasi Kwarteng and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak because of the fact that nuclear power stations are quite expensive. Obviously, there's a lot of upfront costs. It takes a long time for them to actually come on stream. But it seems like this is now going to be a big part of the picture alongside wind power, which the government's still very much attached to. And I think it's a solid move insofar as there is. Obviously, these things are expensive to begin with, but, it's plentiful, clean energy. And when you look at countries like France, who an enormous amount of their power comes from nuclear energy, they have that in their own country, energy security, which really insulates them against some of
It's going to be the key phrase, isn't it? Energy security. We're going to hear it more and more and more now.
Definitely.
And it does seem amazing that nuclear power stations are going to be the answer.
Well,
It feels like a step backwards, but...
Does it? I don't know. I've always
It does,
been quite
except that
pro,
we've got to think of our energy security now.
I remember as a child going up to Sellafield and I used to give tours, and you could walk across the rods, the fuel rods, when they're in. I mean, they're still protected, but you can walk across the top of the fuel rods.
I mean, one assumes they're, I don't know, insulated in some way so that you're not actually, you don't glow green.
You've got your little radiation badges on that you all wear when you're in there and things, but it's extraordinary. Sellafield's an extraordinary place.
I think the question as well, when you're talking about nuclear, whether these like little mini nuclear stations or like whoppers, like the equivalent of Fukushima or Chernobyl or Sellafield, a bit smaller, is that you obviously need the security of the physical asset as well.
Yes.
So, because otherwise that itself is a target for domestic.
I just hope that if we are going to build nuclear power stations, we at the same time invest hugely in renewables, so that maybe one day we can rely on renewables and close down the nuclear power stations.
And the question is, what is the nuclear power station fuelled with as well? Yeah, and the cooling systems and all that stuff. And then if you can have green energy that's supporting the nuclear production, then it's all good.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, but so we've got to do something.
Yeah.
Can we have a look at, it's in the Sunday Express, Marianne, the cost of living situation, but this talk of trying to seize back the stolen billions. Is this furlough?
Yeah, all the fraud around all the financial support mechanisms that came out during COVID to support businesses and individuals. And Lord Agnew, who was a Tory peer, resigned a couple of months ago. He was the anti-fraud minister, the government's own, dyed through the wool Conservative supporter, resigned his own job and said, I cannot do this because the Treasury don't care. They're making no effort to reclaim all the fraudulent losses that have been identified because of things like bounce back loans being paid to companies that didn't exist at the point they were claiming. Loans being given to companies that were already registered at a company's house, which is the kind of registration, that they were dormant, they weren't operating, and yet they still got these loans. Banks issuing loans, duplicate loans, so the same business is applying for support loans from one bank and then the other.
Out and out fraud, as you say.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Why are they saying? Why doesn't the Chancellor want to claw it back?
Why indeed? Well, one of the suggestions is A, because they're a bit hopeless. B, because they go, well, it's public money, but it's more effort than it's worth. We'll just kind
more
of
expensive.
It's expensive, but also it's embarrassing because part of the reason is that they didn't have the mechanisms in place in order to protect the public purse. This and the point that Lord Agnew is making in this article, he's kind of got a column as well as the kind of detail. So this is approximately £37 billion worth of our money, of your viewers' money, that's our hard-earned taxes, being just given to criminals. Sometimes people going, I reckon we can, pull a fast one and kind of do the numbers, fill in the form and get the cash. But also organised crime. They've just taken the money. And it really is incumbent on Rishi Sunak to
get it back.
Make an effort to get it back.
If we could get 20% of that back, that could be funneled into universal credit to help those people who
exactly
have no money at the moment.
I suppose the only difficulty was, I think we all remember at the height of the pandemic, like just the speed with which they were trying to move. You can kind of understand why the usual safeguards, the usual tendering, all these things that would usually go into any programme of this size went by the wayside. But it is still remarkable that there's just no interest in after the fact, trying to claw that back.
And this, Lord Agnew, sorry, one more thing. Lord Agnew makes the point that even when they had sort of after the event, brought in these checks and balances to make it easier for the banks to check that these were legitimate claims. The banks weren't using that. And so then at a certain point, why should the taxpayers be refunding the banks if it's the banks making stupid errors to protect their own shareholders?
Oh, well, fair point.
That's the point. The point is it would take an awful lot of sorting out, wouldn't it? It won't be simple and it won't be
worth
cheap.
it for £37 billion, though.
But if you get it all back, Look, Marianne, Tom, thank you both very much indeed. We'll catch up with you a little bit later.